Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of episode 9 of season 4 of Star Trek Discovery called Rubicon. I guess after one of those runabouts in Deep Space Nine, which were always named after Earth's rivers for some reason. And I have a whole list of things wrong with this episode. All the little details don't make any sense if you think about them, things that contradict previous episodes without any explanation. But visually, I actually enjoyed this episode. It finally had some action scenes, it had some neat special effects, and so visually I was actually enjoying it, even though a lot of things don't make any sense. So the episode starts with Tarka and Book assembling the super weapon that is supposed to destroy the DMA, and it was funny how they have to manually do it. Like, they have to carefully manually put that powder in a little sphere and put the little sphere in the device, and they have to be very careful, and Tarka is sweating as he's doing that. They got that material isolinium from the previous episode to build the isolytic weapon, which by itself is a kind of lazy writing, that the material they needed is named exactly as the weapon they made from it. It's like if you want to build an atomic weapon, you have to get some atomium material to make it so. I guess in some cases it might make sense, like the hydrogen bomb does need some hydrogen, and so I guess I'm fine with it, but it's still kind of lazy writing that they couldn't even come up with some other material they needed for it. They could have easily used some other established material from the Star Trek lore. Like, if I was writing the show, I would have said they needed some chemosite, which was an exotic material that Quark tried to smuggle one time, and the Zindi were using that material to build their super weapon, and so that would have at least established that material as something with the potential to create some dangerous stuff, and also it would not make it sound as if it can only be used for the isolytic weapon, which will beg the question how it was so cheap to buy in the previous episode. They only needed a few bars of platinum to buy it, which doesn't make sense if this is some kind of super weapon. But anyway, this episode begins with them manually pouring that powder into a little sphere and putting the little sphere carefully into a bigger sphere, and it's like a scene from the construction of the first atomic weapon, in which back then robots did not exist, so people had to do it manually, and it was very dangerous and tenseful and all of that. But seeing it here in the 32nd century on Book's ship, which has programmable matter and holograms which can be solid, and robots and all of that stuff which you can use to do that, but no, they still have to manually do it themselves. So that made me laugh immediately at how stupid this was, and apparently that's how you build it. You just need a little sphere and to pour that powder in there, and then you have an isolytic subspace weapon. So if this was so easy, how come the whole galaxy doesn't have it? Like, it only took a few bars of platinum to buy it in the previous episode. So anyway, Michael put a tracking device on that material in the previous episode. It's something I forgot to mention, that when Michael lost that game of cards with Book in the previous episode, she still ends up winning, because beforehand she already planted the tracking device on the material, knowing that she's going to lose to Book. So anyway, this is something also funny about the show, that Michael is so perfect that even when she loses, she still wins. It was the case when she lost that trial with the Vulcans, who she was trying to convince of something, but then they weren't convinced, and yet still it somehow convinced them. Even though she failed, they still gave her what she wanted anyway. So even when she loses, she still wins. So even though she lost that game of card to Book, it was all part of the plan, because she planted a tracker on it. But then it takes them apparently days to just go to Book's ship and grab him. Like, it makes no sense. She had to go to Starfleet headquarters. Now they're planning the mission to get Book. All the while, they spent all this time just talking about what they will do when they do it. And so why not you just go and grab his ship, just disable the ship? Why is it so hard to disable it? And the thing about Book's ship is also very funny, because when it was first shown in season 3, Book was portrayed as some poor guy. He even said that his space broke, that his ship is barely working. He was being chased around by other ships, and the ship did look advanced to our eyes, but I just assumed that it's because it's the 32nd century, and that even a poor man's ship looks advanced to the eyes of the 23rd century. And so I assumed all the other ships will be even more advanced, but recently, in recent episodes, it became obvious that Book actually has the most advanced ship in the entire galaxy that no one can catch, because even the Discovery, after all its upgrades and even having this unique AI system and the sport drive and the 32nd century technology on top. They have all of the latest advancements, and yet they still cannot get Book's ship, and even the two ships fight each other in this episode, and the Discovery loses. They cannot handle Book's little tiny ship. So this is really funny to me, because when his ship first appeared, I just assumed, okay, this is simply the far future, and that's why his little poor ship is so advanced, because the other ships are even more advanced. And yet, apparently, no, he actually had the most advanced ship in the galaxy all along, apparently. So this is just hilarious, and there are so many inconsistencies with previous episodes. Like, the Discovery suddenly has a cloaking device in this episode. And yet, in the previous episode, they couldn't take the ship to that place that didn't like the Federation. They said they cannot see the Discovery because they hate the Federation, even though they ended up going in Starfleet uniforms in a Starfleet shuttle to that place, and everyone saw that they're Starfleet and called them Federation, and yet they had to leave their ship far away. And yet the ship now has a cloaking device, so why didn't they simply cloak the ship in the previous episode? And also in this episode, they say that they cannot beam into Book's ship because he has some kind of super duper defense system that you cannot beam into his ship. And yet, just a few episodes ago, we saw the Romulan space ninja nuns easily beam into his ship. And suddenly, when the plot requires it, suddenly it's not possible. And they could have easily explained all that kind of stuff. They could have said that Tarka is the one who upgraded the ship, and he did upgrade the ship in other ways in this episode, but they didn't know about it, they were surprised by it. So the fact that they say they cannot beam into Book's ship, that means that was something that was there already before any of this. And then just a few episodes ago, people could easily beam into his ship, and suddenly they cannot. So this is the kind of lazy writing with no attention to detail, no attempts to explain anything away, and a lack of continuity even inside this show with itself. And another example is how Michael remembers one of her adventures with Book. This is something that they constantly do in almost every single episode. Michael and Book remember some funny adventure they had before together. I have made a compilation of it already. I was probably too quickly. I should have waited more to gather more scenes like that, because it's funny how every episode they constantly talk about some adventure they had together, and she says that they've been to the Breen space together. And that really annoyed me, because I remember the previous season. I remember that until Discovery got to her, she said that she could never get anywhere close to Earth. So I was okay with that excuse, because I assumed, okay, she must have been in some distant quadrant, maybe on the other side of the beta quadrant, and she didn't have enough fuel, she didn't have enough technology to get far away. And yet, from all these stories we heard since then, apparently she and Book have been all around the galaxy during that time. They've been to the edge of the galaxy, which we saw in the previous episode, just the place they had to be in. They were there before. And in this episode, she says they were in Breen space together, and Breen space cannot be so far away from Earth, because, during the Dominion War, the Breen attacked Earth, and so they cannot possibly be that far away from Earth. And so how come she could never get to Earth in the start of the previous season? And, technically she didn't have to go to Earth itself. Like, the Federation was pretty big, 8,000 light years across, according to Picard in First Contact, and so how come she could never reach any of the planets of the Federation to figure out what happened with the Federation? She didn't even know what happened with her brother Spock. Like, she waited until half the season in the previous season to find out what happened with him. So she knew nothing about the Federation, and yet she was in Breen space, she was all over the galaxy with Book, and yet never met anyone who knew anything about the Federation until Discovery found her. So this is the kind of inconsistency and the logic and the lack of attention to detail that really annoys me. So anyway, the Discovery now has a cloaking device, but it looks like it's the worst cloaking device in the whole galaxy, because you can still see the ship perfectly, you can see its shape, you can see it moving, because it has that ripple effect. Now, I'm willing to forgive this one, because I assume it's just for the sake of the audience, that it's not actually that visible to other ships, otherwise it will be useless as a cloaking device. If you can see even the shape of the ship, you can see everything completely, and so I assume it's just for our sake, and so I'm kind of okay with that, and that effect itself is kind of cool, like that kind of, predator cloaking device. Even in the old Star Trek shows, whenever a ship was cloaking, you could see the ripple effect for a few seconds, but then it became completely invisible after that. And yet now, for the whole episode, whenever they are cloaked, you can always see the ship with all its shapes and lines and everything with the ripple effect, and you can tell exactly where the ship is. But I'm willing to forgive this one, because A, it's a cool, neat looking effect, which I enjoyed visually, and secondly, I'm willing to assume is for the sake of the audience, and it doesn't actually look like that. Same as, sounds in space, and asteroids being always way too close to each other whenever you see an asteroid field, and the asteroids in reality are supposed to be spinning around themselves, and should be in much greater distance, and all the space clouds and all that kind of stuff. which I did complain about when talking about this show, that they always go into space clouds which look like actual clouds on Earth, which doesn't really make any sense. And in the old shows, they often did show some nebula and stuff like that, but it was always in the far distance, and so it does look like a cloud from a big distance. And yet in this show, you can see the ship flying among the clouds, and it looks like tiny clouds, which don't really make any sense. But you know, in Star Trek, there are all kinds of strange subspace anomalies and stuff like that. So I'm willing to come up with excuses and explain it away of how it can look like that, even though it doesn't exist in reality and all of that. And the same with all the planets in the show that look as if they got blown up, and yet all the pieces are left hovering perfectly above the ground, even though it doesn't make any sense. And the show never bothered to explain it, but I'm willing to come up with an excuse to say that maybe because of the burn, because of what happened with the dilithium, it somehow created some quantum locking of materials around the dilithium, and now all the planets that blew up have all these pieces flying around perfectly still next to the planet. And so I'm willing to forgive stuff like that for the sake of visual entertainment, and because in the context of the story I can easily come up with excuses for that. So anyway, the clocking device looks like the worst one ever in the galaxy, but at least it looks cool, so I'm fine with that. And so Michael is once again sent on a mission to stop Book again, even though she failed the previous time, even though she could have easily just knocked him out and just steal or destroy that material, throw it outside into the ocean to slow him down at least or something. But no, she let him have it by losing the poker game, but she planted a tracker on it. And so since then they know where Book is, and yet they spend hours and hours discussing how to get Book, and they're planning the mission which ultimately fails, and so it was all pointless. And they're even planning to bring Dr. Troy with them so that he can de-escalate the situation. So their plan is he will talk Book down and convince him, even though they tried that already so many times. So this is ridiculous. And then the Admiral says that Michael never disappointed him before, and that made me laugh so hard, because in the previous season, didn't she disobey his orders multiple times? So was that not disappointment for him that he tells her to do something and then she doesn't? So anyway, because this is a personal matter, and she's so connected with Book, and so they assigned someone to the ship to take over if the need arises. If Michael is unable to make the tough choices, they will put someone on the ship to make the tough call if needed. And so I immediately started thinking, okay, who will that be? Will it be the Admiral himself? That might be cool if he will be on the ship and there will be some conflict. But then they reveal the Yum Yum lady, who I totally forgot about. I forgot she ever existed. Like, I was happy to forget all about her. She stayed on that seed ship for some reason, for some unexplained stupid reason. Now it's revealed that actually she got recruited right after that into Starfleet's Black Ops Special Forces division, and she's wearing all black and all of that. So once again, the kind of Section 31 kind of stupid stuff like that, with no explanation, no reason for it. She decided to leave the Discovery, go to her own planet or something, but now apparently she changed her mind immediately and instead joined Starfleet again from the back door as some kind of Black Ops operative, and she's a commander now. And for some reason they send her to the Discovery to supervise Michael, to make sure she makes the tough call if needed, if they have to fire on Book's ship. And for some reason she no longer needs the breathing apparatus, and her eyes changed color, because without the breathing apparatus your eyes look different. That's the kind of Kurtzman logic of the show. Nothing makes any sense, as I said many times. And when she first arrives to the bridge and people recognize her because she used to be on the ship for a season and a half or something, and then she says she's just an observer. She says that to the bridge crew. And then Michael tells them, no, you should tell them the truth. You're here to bypass me if needed, even though she's a commander, so nothing makes any sense, as I said. So if they wanted someone to override Michael, shouldn't they put an admiral or another captain at least on the ship, something like that, and let the ship know, the bridge crew, shouldn't they know that the guy supervising has some kind of authority from the president or the admiral or whatever? And yet she herself tells all of them she's just an observer. So nothing makes any sense, because if the need does arrive for her to take over, why should anyone listen to her? She doesn't outrank the captain. She herself says she's just an observer, so why the hell should anyone listen to her if she suddenly wants to override Michael's decision? So nothing makes sense in the show, as usual. And none of this leads to anything. I guess this is just done for the sake of some tension. Same as when the president was on the bridge for some reason and there was some conflict between her and Michael. So I guess it's just meant for some drama, some tension on the bridge, and that's fine. But things should make sense. At least when the president was on the ship, it was obvious that she's the superior one, but in this case, it's a commander, so Michael outranks her, and she herself says she's an observer, so why should anyone listen to her if she has to take over? Book sent a transmission to Michael with a message to her, so it's a hologram of himself, and they said the transmission is encrypted, so they cannot figure out where it's coming from. And I found that really strange and funny, because isn't it a transmission? So how does it being encrypted prevent you from figuring out where it came from? Like, it doesn't really make any sense. It's a transmission, right? It's some kind of wave. It's something moving from a place to a place. So how come you cannot pinpoint the direction it came from because it's encrypted? The message itself is encrypted. That means you shouldn't be able to read the message. It doesn't mean you cannot detect where the message is from. So stuff like that really drives me nuts in the show, that they don't seem to know the difference between scientific terms. Like, they confuse everything, like sonar in space, gravity waves which somehow push you instead of pulling you, even though it's gravity. And there was another silly line when they said that nothing is ever binary or something like that, and I cannot help thinking this is once again part of the checklist of agendas they have to promote and all of that. So they have kind of silly dialogue like that which seems forced and artificial. And we have the usual silly lines like the new Mr. No Response says there is no response. And I keep wondering, why the hell did they bring this guy to replace Mr. Bryce? And yet Mr. Bryce is still on the bridge as well, but it's now this other guy who says his lines that there's no response. So why did they need to establish this new character who they did absolutely nothing with to replace Mr. Bryce, even though Mr. Bryce is still on the bridge as well? But it's now this other guy who keeps saying no response. So what was the point of bringing a new character who does the same thing that this other character was already doing? And now Mr. Bryce is doing nothing. Now he's only arguing with Mr. Reese all the time about Book's decisions. So is that why they had to release him from his duties as being Mr. No Response to give it to this other guy who they ended up doing absolutely nothing with? And we have another scene of Saru contacting the Vulcan president. And then Saru asks her, can you meditate with me again like we did in a few episodes ago? I really enjoyed that. Let's do it again. And then a few pillows appear on the floor, and he's all in his own quarters, and the president sees that, and that's fine. But then she also sits on the same pillows. But she's a hologram who is transmitting herself from another planet, and yet she's able to sit on the pillows in his quarters. I guess maybe the same kind of holographic pillows appeared on her side as well, and that can make sense, I guess. But still, stuff like that really kind of takes me out of it, because it just doesn't look right. It doesn't make any sense. I have to think about it. Wait, what just happened? Where exactly? What she's sitting on her side? It's the same problem as was in the very first episode of the whole show, when Serek's hologram appeared when they were back in the 23rd century, and then Serek sat on Michael's desk on board the Discovery. And I remember thinking back then, wait, what exactly is he sitting on his side? Because is there the same exact room on his side, and the holograms should not have been solid back then? At least in this scene here, at least this is in the far future, so I'm guessing holograms can appear on both ends and be solid, and so I guess it's fine here. But still, stuff like that kind of takes me out of the show. I have to stop anything that I'm thinking about in the scene, and I have to think, wait, does that make sense? Does this make sense? So why write it like that? Why do it in such a way that is just distracting? Why not show a quick shot of her on her own planet and show us how things look like from her side? That will be much cooler to see how it looks like from both ends, and then they can explain it. Then it can be fun. Then it will make sense and will be more enjoyable, more interesting. So anyway, she and Saru are apparently in love, and they're dating via holograms and whatever, and I guess I find that these two actors are actually really good. Despite the makeup of Saru, he manages to convey emotions through the makeup, so he's a really good actor, and that makes it at least somewhat enjoyable. So this is the only two characters that I actually kind of care about in the show. They actually made me feel for them. Even though the Vulcan president doesn't really make sense, because she's supposed to be a Vulcan, she's not a Romulan, they said that previously, and yet she's all about emotions. She behaves totally un-Vulcan-like. She's the complete opposite of what Vulcans used to be. So apparently Vulcans changed their nature completely. It would have been much better to simply make her a Romulan. Simply say that the Romulans do experience emotion, they do things emotionally. So why not just make her a Romulan? That would have made so much more sense. and yet she's apparently a Vulcan, but yet practicing emotion. So the Vulcans became the complete opposite of what they used to be in the old shows. I guess I'm fine with it because it's in the far future, so maybe they simply changed their ideology, they're no longer about it. It was also funny in that episode when Michael had to prove something to the Vulcans, she had to convince them of something, and then they judged her claims not by the scientific facts of it, but by the emotions. They had to psychologically investigate her and her motives and all of that, which was totally stupid, especially for Vulcans. It was so unscientific, it was the complete opposite of what the Vulcans are supposed to be, which are like the perfect scientists, which are all based on logic and facts and the scientific method, but now it's all about emotions. So anyway, the Discovery and Book ship play cat and mouse, and they try to catch each other, and the spore jump all around each other, which did have some cool moments. That's why I said I actually enjoyed this episode visually. Then they jump right into the middle of the DMA anomaly, and they're perfectly fine there. And I'm thinking, wait a second, in the first episodes of the season, whenever they even got close to that anomaly, they could barely survive it. Like the Book ship was ripped apart, and they had to be pulled out with a cable, which I'm still laughing about. They have tractor beams, which they forgot about, and they had to use an actual cable to pull it in, like in the times of Enterprise, like the NX-01 cable. It was made from programmable matter, I guess, which is much tougher than any material, fine, but it was still kind of silly that to get a little bit closer to the center of the anomaly, they had to use a little cable so that it can scan a little bit better. So this was so ridiculous. So anyway, in this episode, they suddenly can jump right into the middle of the DMA without any trouble. Suddenly, their ships are not being ripped apart by the gravity or whatever. And so, again, an inconsistency, again, a contradiction of the internal continuity of the show itself. And between each action scene of them failing to capture Book, Yam Yam keeps calling Michael into the ready room to tell her, you have to use more deadly force or I will take over. And in the end of the episode, she doesn't actually end up doing anything. So I was hoping that maybe it will go somewhere, maybe she will take over and do something, but of course she doesn't. So what was the point of any of that? I have no idea. And constantly everyone are making excuses for Book. Like Book is firing at the Discovery with all his weapons, nearly disabling the Discovery. His ship apparently is more powerful than the Discovery now, and Book is firing weapons at the Discovery, and everyone are making excuses for him and saying, oh, he's just angry because his planet blew up. And so even as they're under fire from him, Michael is making up excuses for him and saying, oh no, Book didn't mean it. It's like an abused wife, like she's been beaten up by her husband and keeps making excuses. Oh no, he's just drunk today, he had a bad day, that's why he's behaving like this. Like Michael is being like an abuse victim, coming up with excuses for her abuser in the scene. And so I found that kind of funny. Like, isn't she supposed to be a tough, independent woman? So why is she allowing Book to slap her ship around like that? So all of this was really silly. And he doesn't even answer her hailing frequencies and all of that, so she has to take a shuttle to fly right up to his ship to talk with him face to face through the window. I'm not joking. Remember the cone of silence in the previous episodes? This is even sillier now. So now he doesn't answer any hails at all, so she takes a shuttle, flies all the way to his ship to look him in the eye through the window, and then he answers her. And meanwhile, Tarka is standing behind him, and I'm constantly thinking, Book, you're not alone on the ship. Remember this crazy guy who you know is crazy? He wants to blow everything up just because he wants to get to some other universe. He doesn't care about this universe at all. You remember that guy, right? He's standing right behind you. And it seems like everyone forgot about him. Like all the Discover crew are all focused on how to convince Book to listen to them. And all of them forgot he's not alone on the ship. There's some other crazy guy with him, but he's completely forgotten about. So he stands behind Book, and I keep waiting, okay, when is the moment when he's going to stun Book and take matters into his own hands, because Book will be convinced by Michael. And of course in the end Book does get convinced, which is kind of disappointing, because again, it doesn't, all this story arc ended up not going anywhere, because in the end Book redeemed himself, he became good in the end, suddenly he surrenders to Michael. So he will not be held responsible for anything, I guess, in the future, because he had a change of heart in the last second, and it was Tarka alone who decides to launch the weapon anyway. So Michael managed to convince Book, but they all forgot about Tarka standing right behind him, and then Tarka launches the weapon and destroys the anomaly apparently. The weapon worked, the anomaly is gone, and so at least something finally happened. And so, oh, they accidentally started a war with this super advanced civilization from outside the galactic barrier. I wonder what will happen next. Maybe we'll finally get to see them. It's also funny how long they're planning for a first contact with them. Like across multiple episodes now, they're planning to make first contact. Why don't you just make the contact instead of planning to make it? Like, what are you waiting for? You have the spore drive. You can jump to their location right away. So what is there to plan? You could have done that 5 episodes ago. They knew the location of that species for a few episodes now. And they're still waiting to go there. What are you waiting for exactly? Just go there. Go there before Book does whatever he wants to do. Like, just do the first contact. They have to plan for it for multiple episodes. So they sabotage the DMA, which is the mining equipment of that species. And so, oh no, this is so dramatic. I wonder what will happen next. And the very next scene, they reveal, oh, the DMA is back, as if nothing happened. They just remade the DMA. So it was not any big deal at all. It was just a minor inconvenience for that other species. So this made me really facepalm really hard, because it makes all the drama, all the stakes they try to raise, all the tension they try to build, it's all meaningless now, because it didn't end up doing anything. It didn't change anything. It was a minor inconvenience for that other people. So what's the point of all of this? So nothing actually changed. So for multiple episodes now, there is no progression of the story at all. It's the same exact story, just being dragged out from multiple episodes without any resolution. So this is getting really annoying. So the whole plot of the season is probably the worst one from the entire show. At least the previous seasons did have some interesting ideas, and the other episodes in between were about something, but now the whole season is about this anomaly which they trying to figure out, and they keep gathering data. Each episode they're gathering new data and trying to analyze it, and that's it. And there is no progression. Nothing really gets resolved or solved. We don't know anything new at all, barely, just tiny pieces of information that apparently is just a mining equipment of this gigantic species of powerful beings, and so there was that risk of starting a war accidentally, but then they blew up the thing, and then it didn't actually do anything. It didn't cause any damage on the other side. There's nothing dramatic, there's nothing big that happened from all of these multiple episodes leading into nothing. Nothing actually changed in the overall picture. What a disappointing show. Like, nothing actually changes. So it's still hilarious how many times they said that they're collecting the data and analyzing it, like every single episode, and it doesn't lead to anything. Barely, just barely small pieces of information. Oh, they're mining boromite. That's really interesting. That's the material that was used in the Omega particle. So I guess it will be connected to something like that. And there's also some conflict between the bridge officers. Mr. Reese is arguing with Mr. No Response about whether or not Book's actions are justified, and Mr. Reese says that it is justified because he lost his family, and Mr. No Response says, don't compare your own tragedy. And so I'm thinking, oh, that's why they had that scene of Mr. Rice saying that he lost his whole village to a tornado a few episodes ago, which was a totally random piece of dialogue. So maybe they put it in to establish that he has a tragic backstory himself, so that's why he will understand Book's actions. But I'm thinking, but all of these guys on the Discovery, they all lost all of their families. They all jumped 1,000 years into the future, so all of them lost their entire family in a way. Even though I guess it's not the same knowing that your family lived happily ever after and you just don't have to see them again. It's not the same as knowing they all died at a young age, so it's not the same. But still, all of them experienced a similar tragedy of simply losing their entire family and never seeing them again. So how come they now have these divisions between someone who does understand the tragedy and someone who doesn't? And one more comment about the scene we have of the next episode, in which we see the Admiral talking with the President, once again planning to make the first contact with the aliens. And I'm thinking, this is like the 5th episode in a row in which they're planning to make first contact instead of just making it. So that's kind of ridiculous, but the stupid thing in that scene is how he says that they've never been outside the galaxy. And that makes me really angry, because once again the Admiral knows absolutely nothing about Star Trek history, because even back in the original series, Kirk left the galaxy with the help of some aliens who took over the ship. The ship flew out of the galaxy heading to the Andromeda galaxy, and in TNG, thanks to the Traveler, the Enterprise D flew to another galaxy, and in Voyager, thanks to the Q, the Voyager appeared in the beginning of the universe, witnessing the Big Bang and stuff like that. And so multiple Starfleet ships were outside of the galaxy multiple times. So what the hell do you mean you were never outside the galaxy? And so stuff like that, all the lack of attention to detail is really annoying to me, but at least it gives me materials to make all the comparison videos and compilations and stuff like that. So at least it gives me something to do, and hopefully it's funny and entertaining to watch all of this stuff. So at least we get some kind of entertainment out of this mess of a show. So that's all I have to say about it for today. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss all of this in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.